I'm Captain Rose Russell. 3 a.m., the phone rings, and on the other end is my father, General Marcus Iron Russell. He wasn't calling to ask if I was okay, but to inform me in a cold, judgmental tone that my apartment building was on fire. "I warned you about that slum," he said. What stunned the legendary general wasn't the fire. It was my reaction. I laughed. "Before I tell you why, I need to know I'm not alone in this fight. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever felt judged by your own family at your absolute worst moment, hit that like and subscribe button. Because this story is for all of us." The sound that woke me wasn't the distant wail of sirens, but the shrill digital ring of my phone on the nightstand. It sliced through the pre-dawn silence of my officers' quarters at Fort Bragg, a sterile, impersonal room that smelled faintly of pine cleaner and discipline. My eyes snapped open. I didn't need to look at the clock to know the hour was ungodly. My hand fumbled for the phone, and the screen lit up with 2 words, glowing in the dark in all caps: "The General." My stomach coiled into a tight, familiar knot. My father never called at this hour to check in. General Marcus Russell didn't make wellness calls. He delivered tactical reports. I swiped to answer, my heart thudding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. His voice came through the speaker exactly as I'd expected, cold as polished steel, devoid of any emotion except a thinly veiled annoyance. "Your building is on fire," he stated. Not a question, a declaration of fact. I was silent, my mind struggling to catch up. My building? The off-base apartment I'd fought so hard for, the one place that was truly mine. Flames, smoke, my neighbors. I held my breath, waiting, hoping for the 4 words that should have come next. "Are you okay, Rose?" But they never came. Instead, what I got was this: "I hope you were smart enough not to keep your dress uniform or medals in a place like that. It would be an embarrassment." Can you believe that? An embarrassment. My life, my safety, the well-being of the families who lived down the hall from me, none of it registered. His first thought was of the objects, the symbols of his legacy that I carried. The polished brass and colored ribbons he saw not as my accomplishments, but as extensions of his own honor, now at risk of being tarnished by what he'd always called my poor life choices. My throat felt like it was coated in sand, dry and bitter. The taste of his disappointment was something I knew all too well. And then I laughed. It wasn't a sound of joy. It was a broken, mechanical thing, a series of sharp, ragged bursts of air that were closer to sobs. It was the sound of a pressure valve finally giving way after 32 years of being screwed down too tight. I laughed like a faulty engine trying to turn over, a hacking, sputtering noise that echoed in the small, dark room. It was the only way my body could process the sheer, breathtaking absurdity of the moment. The general on the other end fell silent. The silence of a 4-star legend completely outmaneuvered by the one variable he could never calculate, his own daughter. I could almost picture him, ramrod straight even in his pajamas, utterly baffled. He could strategize a war on the other side of the world, but he couldn't comprehend the sound coming from my throat. That laugh was every ignored achievement, every dismissive comment, every time I was measured and found wanting, all exploding at once. But then, through the fog of my own fractured sanity, other names pushed through. Sully, the retired master sergeant in 2B. Ilara, the former army nurse in 3A. The Al-Jamil family on the first floor with their 2 small children. The laugh died in my throat, choked off by a sudden, cold wave of responsibility. The officer inside me, the commander, took over. The part of me that he had forged, ironically enough. "I have to go," I said, my voice now level and clear. And I hung up, leaving him in his stunned silence on the other end of the line. I threw on my fatigues and was out the door in under 3 minutes. The drive was a blur of flashing lights growing brighter in my rearview mirror. When I arrived, the scene was controlled chaos. The air was thick, a toxic soup of burnt plastic, scorched wood, and fear. Flames licked out of the top-floor windows of my building, orange tongues tasting the night sky. But I'm a soldier. Panic is a luxury I can't afford. I found the incident commander, a fire chief with soot on his face and exhaustion in his eyes, and was getting a quick report when a familiar, gleaming black sedan pulled up to the perimeter. My father. He stepped out, dressed in civilian slacks and a polo shirt, but carrying himself as if he were on a parade ground. He ignored me, didn't even glance in my direction. His eyes, sharp and analytical, swept over the burning building, not with concern, but with the detached appraisal of an officer assessing a failed bombing run. He strode directly to the fire chief, his posture radiating an authority that demanded attention. "I'm General Russell," he boomed, his voice cutting through the noise of the engines and radios. "My daughter lives here." He paused, then delivered the final verdict. A regrettable decision. He said it to the chief, but it was for me. He spoke about me as if I were a misbehaving private, a logistical error that needed to be cleaned up. The fire chief, a man who had probably seen everything, just nodded respectfully and then glanced at me. His eyes were full of pity. And that look, the pity from a man I'd never met, hurt more than the flames ever could. It was a confirmation of my humiliation, a public stamp on my failure. My father finally turned to me. He lowered his voice, but just enough, a practiced, tactical volume that allowed those nearby to overhear. "After this is over, you're moving back to the base. This circus ends now. I'll handle it." He wasn't talking to me. He was issuing an order. He had turned my tragedy into his embarrassment, my home into a circus, right in front of the very people who were risking their lives to save what was left of my world. I stood there, in my fatigues, surrounded by the flashing lights and the smell of smoke, and felt utterly exposed, stripped naked, disarmed by the very man who taught me how to hold a weapon. After leaving the fire scene, after the adrenaline had faded and left a hollow ache in its place, I didn't go to the temporary lodging the army had arranged. I couldn't face the sympathetic glances, the sterile kindness of strangers. Instead, I drove back to Fort Bragg and let myself into my office. It was a small, soulless room, smelling of government-issue coffee and old paper. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat in my desk chair in the heavy darkness, my silhouette framed by the pale moonlight spilling over the empty parade ground outside. The acrid smell of smoke still clung to my fatigues, a ghostly reminder of the flames. But it wasn't the strongest scent in the room. Underneath it was something else, an odor I knew intimately, the stale, metallic smell of familiar disappointment. What happened tonight wasn't new. It wasn't a sudden deviation from the norm. It was just another chapter in a book that was written long ago, its pages yellowed and worn. I'd grown accustomed to being a regrettable decision in my father's eyes. The humiliation I felt earlier wasn't a fresh wound. It was the tearing open of old scars, scars that crisscrossed my soul like a complex battle map. And as I sat there, the memories came flooding back, uninvited, like ghosts who had been waiting patiently in the corners of my mind for just this moment of weakness. The most vivid one is always the same. My graduation from the United States Military Academy at West Point. It was a perfect May afternoon, the kind of day that feels polished and new. Michie Stadium was a breathtaking sea of dress gray uniforms, a meticulously arranged landscape of future leaders. For 4 years, I'd poured every ounce of myself into that place. I'd sweat through freezing morning runs along the Hudson and bled on the obstacle courses. I'd spent sleepless nights in the library, fueled by black coffee and the desperate need to prove I belonged. And I had done it. I was graduating with honors, a distinguished cadet. When the ceremony ended, when the caps were thrown into the bright blue sky like a flock of black birds taking flight, the field erupted in a joyous chaos. Families streamed onto the turf, laughing, crying, embracing their sons and daughters. Proud tears streamed down the faces of mothers and fathers as they pinned the gold bars of a second lieutenant onto their children's shoulders for the first time. I scanned the crowd, my heart pounding with a fragile hope, and found him. My father was standing apart from the celebration, his hands clasped behind his back in his classic parade rest stance. He looked stern, impassive, as if he were observing a training exercise. I walked over, my new uniform feeling stiff and foreign on my body. He looked at me, his gaze clinical, then down at the shiny new rank on my shoulder. "Well done," he said, his voice a flat monotone. Then he added, "But, when I graduated, I was first in my class." Just like that. One sentence, and the entire monumental effort of the last 4 years crumbled into dust. The pride, the relief, the sense of accomplishment, all of it evaporated under the weight of his comparison. In that moment, I wasn't his daughter celebrating a triumph. I was just a lesser version of him. A flawed replica. A few years later, another memory adds itself to the map. My return from my first deployment to Afghanistan. I was awarded the Bronze Star for developing an intelligence plan that had allowed my unit to avoid a deadly, well-laid ambush. It was my first real taste of combat, of life and death stakes. And I had excelled. I had kept my people safe. When I came home, my father hosted a small dinner. He invited a few of his old general friends, men with chests full of medals and heads full of war stories. The entire evening, he held court, regaling them with tales of his own exploits during Operation Desert Storm. He talked about strategy, about command, about the good old days. My presence felt like an afterthought. Finally, one of his friends, a kindly old Air Force general, turned to me. "So, Rose," he said, gesturing to the medal pinned to my uniform, "tell us how you earned this one." Before I could open my mouth, my father waved a dismissive hand. "Ah, they give those out more easily these days," he said with a casual laugh. "The girl just did her job. Nothing more." He didn't even let me tell my own story. My contribution, my courage, the lives I had helped save. He reduced it all to a simple transaction, a duty performed. An act so obvious it wasn't even worth mentioning. I sat there, invisible, my voice stolen from me by the man who was supposed to be my biggest champion. It was in moments like those that the memory of another man would surface, a man who was the complete opposite of my father. Colonel Miller, my commanding officer, my mentor, the man who had died on that same deployment. He never compared. He never dismissed. He listened. I remember standing in his tent, the desert heat pressing in as I laid out my intelligence analysis on a map. When I finished, he didn't just nod. He looked at me, really looked at me, with an intensity that made me feel seen. "Russell," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You have a brilliant mind. Don't you ever let anyone, not even a 4-star general, tell you otherwise." It was his voice, not the citation on the medal, that I held onto. It was his validation that I carried with me through the darkest nights. Now, sitting alone in the silent office, surrounded by the ghosts of my past, I realized something. This fight, the one that started tonight, wasn't just about a burned-down building. It wasn't just about getting justice for my neighbors. I was fighting to protect the value Colonel Miller saw in me, the value my own father had never, not once, acknowledged. I was fighting for his legacy, yes, but I was also fighting for my own. I didn't sleep that night. Not a single second. After leaving my office, I spent the remaining hours of darkness staring at the ceiling of my temporary quarters, the words of Colonel Miller echoing in the silence. "Don't you ever let anyone tell you otherwise." But it was another feeling that kept me awake, a sharp, gnawing guilt that burrowed deep into my gut. I still had my career, my uniform, a roof over my head. My neighbors, the people I'd shared awkward elevator rides and polite morning greetings with, now had nothing but the clothes on their backs. I couldn't just sit there, drowning in my own family drama while they were adrift. I couldn't just stand by. The moment the sun was up, I was on the phone. My first call was to Sully. I asked him to gather everyone he could reach. Our meeting point. Sully's Smokehouse, a small no-frills BBQ joint on the outskirts of town, run by a retired Marine buddy of his. When I walked in an hour later, the rich, smoky aroma of hickory and slow-cooked pork hung heavy in the air. But not even that comforting smell could mask the exhaustion etched onto the faces of my neighbors. They were huddled around a long wooden table in the back, looking shell-shocked and lost. Sully, his weathered face set in a grim line. Alara, her usual calm nurse's demeanor replaced by a quiet anxiety. The Al-Jamil family, trying to keep their two young kids from getting restless. The owner, a mountain of a man named Gus with a bulldog tattoo on his forearm, came over carrying a tray of tall glasses filled with iced tea. He set them down on the table, the ice clinking softly. "Folks," he said in a low rumble, "anything you want today, it's on the house. You just say the word." His simple act of kindness, of solidarity, struck a chord deep inside me. I looked at the worn-out faces around the table, Sully, Ilara, the Al-Jamils, and a profound shift happened within me. In that moment, I wasn't a victim of a fire. I wasn't the disappointed daughter of a famous general. I was their commanding officer, and this was my squad. I pulled out a small government-issue notebook and a pen from my pocket, the two tools an intel officer is never without. The familiar weight in my hand was grounding. "All right," I began, my voice steady, cutting through the weary silence. "Let's put last night aside for a minute. I need you all to think back. The last few weeks. Anything strange? Anything out of the ordinary?" At first, just silence. Blank stares. They were still trapped in the trauma of the fire. I waited, giving them a moment. Then Alara spoke up, her voice soft but clear. "The fire alarm," she said. "Last week, it went off around midnight. The fire department came, checked everything out, and said it was a system malfunction." Sully nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing in thought. "And what about the water getting shut off on Tuesday?" he added. "Management sent out an email, said it was a burst pipe. But the plumber they supposedly called, he never showed up." Mr. Al-Jamil chimed in, his English accented, but his meaning clear. "The lock on the main entrance, broken for 3 days, anyone could walk in." Piece by piece, the puzzle started to come together. A faulty fire alarm that gets everyone used to false alarms. A sudden water outage, making the sprinkler system useless. A broken security door. My skin went cold. These weren't random, unfortunate maintenance issues. This was a pattern. A deliberate, calculated effort to degrade the building's safety, to make our lives miserable. Someone was softening the target, paving the way for what happened last night. Just as this chilling realization settled over the table, a man approached us. He was wearing a worn field jacket and looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He clutched a coffee cup in his hand like a lifeline. "Excuse me for interrupting," he said, his voice low and cautious. "My name is Jasper Thorne. I'm a freelance journalist." He glanced around the table, his eyes landing on me. "I've been tracking the new owners of your building, a company called Aegis Development Group." He pulled up a chair without being asked, leaning in close. "These guys have a playbook," Jasper explained, his words coming out in a rush. "It's the same in every city. They buy up older, rent-controlled buildings in prime locations. Then, accidents happen, a sudden fire, a partial collapse from structural failure, a severe mold outbreak. They clear the lot without having to pay for expensive buyouts or relocations, then flip the property for a massive profit." His words hung in the air, clicking perfectly into place with everything we had just pieced together. My suspicion now had a name, a face, and a motive. Aegis. I looked around the table again. This time, I didn't see dazed victims. I saw assets. I saw Sully, with his decades of military experience and his vast network of veterans across the country. I saw Alara, with the meticulous attention to detail and unwavering patience of a career nurse. I saw Jasper, with his investigative skills and his hunger for the truth. And me, an intelligence officer trained to analyze patterns and predict an enemy's next move. We weren't helpless. We were a unit, a squad without weapons, but not without power. I capped my pen and shut my notebook. The time for grieving was over. The time for analysis was done. It was time for action. "All right," I said, and my voice had the crisp, decisive edge of command. "If they wanted a fight, they've got one. We're launching Operation Aegis Shield." Their heads snapped up. The exhaustion in their eyes was replaced by a flicker of something else. Focus. Purpose. "Here's the plan," I continued, making eye contact with each of them. Sully, I want you to work your network. Find out about any other accidents linked to this company. We need to establish their pattern of behavior nationally. Alara, you're our lead for human intelligence. I need you to collect detailed statements from every single resident of that building. Every anomaly, every complaint that was ignored. Jasper, you're on open source intel. I want you to dig into every public record, every corporate filing, every permit connected to Aegis. Find the money trail. And me, I'll coordinate, I'll build the strategy. For the first time since that 3 a.m. phone call, the gnawing guilt in my stomach subsided. It was replaced by something sharp and clear. Purpose. The battle had just begun. The next few weeks were a blur of organized chaos. Our lives were scattered to the winds. People were sleeping on friends' couches, in spare rooms of relatives they hadn't seen in years, or in cheap, transient motels off the highway that smelled of disinfectant and quiet desperation. Our command center became the last booth in the Al-Jamil's small cafe, where Mr. Al-Jamil now worked double shifts to make ends meet. It was there, surrounded by the comforting aroma of coffee beans and fresh bread, that we waged our war of paper and phone calls. One afternoon, I was hunched over a large city planning map Jasper had managed to acquire, my eyes tracing zoning lines until they blurred. I was running on fumes, skipping meals without even noticing. Suddenly, a plastic food container slid into my field of vision. I looked up. It was Alara, her expression a mixture of concern and gentle command. "Captain," she said softly, "you need to eat. You look like you're about to fall over." I opened the container. Inside was a steaming portion of macaroni and cheese, the ultimate American comfort food. It was rich and gooey, smelling of sharp cheddar and baked breadcrumbs. A wave of gratitude washed over me, so potent it almost brought tears to my eyes. I realized I hadn't had a proper meal all day. In that moment, her simple, unspoken act of care meant more to me than any commendation I had ever received. It was a quiet affirmation that someone saw me, not as a captain, not as a general's daughter, but as a person who needed looking after. While I was coordinating our efforts, Sully became our one-man intelligence network. Armed with nothing more than his ancient flip phone and a worn address book, he was a force of nature. He'd spend hours on the phone, his gravelly voice echoing with, "Hey, you old dog, it's Sully," as he called his contacts at American Legion posts and VFW halls across the country. He was leveraging a brotherhood forged in distant wars for a battle we were fighting right here at home. One evening, he called me, his voice crackling with an energy I hadn't heard in weeks. "Rose, you're not gonna believe this," he said, and I could practically see the glint in his eye. I was talking to an old buddy of mine from the 1st Cav, down in San Antonio, told him our story. He said the exact same thing happened in his neighborhood 2 years ago. An old apartment complex, mostly vets. And guess who the developer was? Aegis. It was the breakthrough we needed, a direct link, a verifiable pattern. He hadn't done it because it was his assigned task in our little operation. He did it because that's what soldiers do. We were his squad now. And you never, ever leave your squad behind. Then came the 4th Thursday in November, Thanksgiving. All morning my phone remained silent on the counter, a dark, quiet rectangle. No calls, no texts from my father. An old, familiar ache settled in my chest. A quiet grief for the family connection I saw all around me but could never seem to grasp for myself. I had planned to spend the day at my office, burying myself in paperwork to keep the loneliness at bay. But Alara and Sully wouldn't have it. They showed up at my door and insisted, with the gentle tyranny of true friends, that I come with them to the local community church. The parish was hosting a dinner for all the displaced families. The fellowship hall was bustling and warm, filled with mismatched tables and folding chairs. The meal was simple: pre-sliced turkey from a catering tray, instant mashed potatoes, and a store-bought pumpkin pie. But as we all sat together, a small island of resilience in a sea of loss, passing around paper plates and plastic forks, I felt a sense of belonging that no formal family dinner had ever given me. Mr. Al-Jamil arrived with a large foil pan, and when he opened it, a fragrant steam rose up. He'd brought a huge dish of roasted chicken and potatoes, seasoned with the sumac and herbs of his homeland. In my country, he said with a warm smile, when you are still alive to celebrate, that is the most important thing. We ate, we talked, we even laughed. For a few hours, we weren't a collection of victims. We were a family. A strange, cobbled together, beautiful family. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned, Alara and I stayed behind to help clean up. As we were wiping down the last of the tables, she suddenly stopped and looked at me. "Captain," she said, her voice full of a sincere emotion that caught me off guard. "Thank you." I was confused. "For what, Alara?" Her eyes were clear and steady. "For not giving up on us," she said. "When I got out of the army, after all those years as a medic, I felt lost, like I didn't have a mission anymore. But these last few weeks, fighting alongside everyone, I feel like I have a purpose again, like I'm part of a unit. You gave us a battle worth fighting." Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. In that moment, I understood. I hadn't just been fighting for them. I wasn't just their leader, trying to get them justice. They, with their quiet trust, their unwavering loyalty, their simple container of mac and cheese, they were saving me too. They were rescuing me from the isolation, from the crushing feeling of worthlessness that my father had so carefully cultivated in my heart for all these years. The fire had taken my home, but in the ashes, I had found a family. And that was a foundation no one could ever burn down. Our small war of attrition was starting to make a ripple. Jasper's first article, published on a small but respected investigative blog, got more traction than we'd expected. It was just a flicker of light, but it was enough for the cockroaches to feel the heat. Aegis responded, not with lawyers or public statements, but with something far more insidious. She walked into the Al-Jamil's cafe one morning like she owned the place. She was wearing an impeccably tailored navy blue power suit that probably cost more than my car, her heels clicking with quiet authority on the tiled floor. She introduced herself as Serafina Vance, Executive Vice President of Aegis Development Group. She wasn't arrogant or dismissive. She was worse. She was sympathetic. Her face was a masterfully crafted mask of concern as she sat down with us, her voice as smooth and sweet as honey. "On behalf of Aegis," she began, her gaze sweeping over the tired faces of my neighbors, "I want to express our deepest regrets for this tragic accident." She let the words hang in the air, thick with insincerity. "And to demonstrate our goodwill, we would like to offer each displaced family a compensation package, $10,000, along with our full assistance in securing new housing." $10,000. The number was a calculated insult, a pittance compared to a lifetime of accumulated belongings and a sense of security. But for a family staring down homelessness, for parents with kids to feed and bills to pay, it was a lifeline. It was a tempting, poisonous apple offered to people who were starving. I saw it immediately in their eyes, the flicker of hope warring with the exhaustion of the fight. She wasn't offering help. She was planting a seed of division. The oldest tactic in the book, divide and conquer. A few days later, the second prong of the attack came. My phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar number with a 202 area code. Washington, D.C. A cold knot formed in my stomach. "Captain Russell," a crisp, no-nonsense voice said, "this is Colonel Bishop from General Miller's office." My blood ran cold. He didn't mean my Colonel Miller. He meant General Mark Miller, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest-ranking military officer in the entire country. "We've received several anonymous complaints, Captain," the voice continued, each word a carefully placed drop of ice, "regarding an active duty officer becoming involved in civilian affairs that could potentially compromise the image of the United States Army. I would advise you to refocus on your duties. That is all." The line went dead. It wasn't advice. It was a threat, delivered with the cold, sterile precision of a surgical strike. They had found my weak point, my career, my entire life. Aegis wasn't just a greedy corporation, they were connected. They had the power to reach into the heart of the Pentagon and pull strings I couldn't even see. and they were aiming their biggest gun right at me. That evening, my father called. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence, but his tone was different this time. The icy detachment was gone, replaced by a thick, syrupy layer of false concern that turned my stomach. "Rose, I hear you're stirring up trouble," he began, his voice oozing a patriarchal disappointment. "Do you have any idea the position you're putting me in? Colonel Bishop called me personally. You're jeopardizing your entire career over this nonsense." He sighed, a theatrical sound of fatherly burden. "Listen to me. Take their money and walk away. Sometimes a smart soldier knows when to choose a different battle." I was speechless, frozen. He knew. He knew it was a threat, a dirty, underhanded move by a corrupt company. But instead of defending me, instead of standing with his daughter, he was telling me to surrender, to lay down my arms. "What are you even doing this for?" he demanded, his voice rising. "For a bunch of strangers?" "They're my squad, Dad," I whispered, my own voice trembling with a rage I couldn't unleash. "Your squad is in the United States Army," he roared, the mask of concern finally dropping to reveal the familiar iron underneath. "Do not embarrass me any further." The pressure worked. It always does. A few days later, Farid al-Jamil and the heads of 2 other families came to see me at the cafe. They couldn't look me in the eye. Farid was their spokesman, his face a portrait of misery. "Captain Rose," he started, his voice heavy with shame. "We are so grateful for everything, but we cannot fight anymore. My wife, she needs an operation. We need the money. We are going to accept their offer." I couldn't blame them. How could I? They had to do what was best for their families. Their battle was for survival, right now. I just nodded, a hollow feeling spreading through my chest, as if a support beam inside me had just cracked and given way. Aegis had won the first battle without firing a single shot. And just like that, I was more alone than ever. Attacked by the enemy from the front, threatened by my superiors from above, and stabbed in the back by my own father. And I have to ask you, if you've ever had a loved one tell you to give up on something you believed in, just to make their own life easier, hit that like button. And let me know in the comments, just type one word: forward. Because that's the only direction I knew I could go. This fight, which had once felt so righteous and clear, now felt desperate. It felt hopeless. After the Al-Jamils left, a profound sense of hopelessness settled over me. The carefully constructed walls of my resolve began to crumble. My moral compass, the internal gyroscope that had always pointed true north toward duty and honor, was spinning wildly. I was fighting a multi-front war with no reinforcements, and I was losing. I needed to reset. I needed to remember why I put on the uniform in the first place. So, I took a day of leave. I got in my car before dawn and drove north, chasing the sunrise up I-95 toward Virginia. My destination, Arlington National Cemetery. There's a silence at Arlington you won't find anywhere else on Earth. It's a heavy, reverent quiet that presses in on you, silencing the trivial worries of the living. I walked for what felt like hours among the endless, rolling hills. A stark white forest of marble headstones standing in perfect, silent formation. Each one a story. Each one a sacrifice. Each one a price paid in full. The sheer scale of it all, the quiet dignity, the immense cost of freedom, made my own struggles feel small, almost petty. I found my way to Section 60, the final resting place for so many who fell in Iraq and Afghanistan. I stood before the grave of a young sergeant from my first platoon, a kid from Ohio who'd had a goofy laugh and an unshakable faith in the good of people. I came here to find stillness, to strip away the noise and the anger and the fear, and to reconnect with the core principles I had sworn an oath to uphold, to remember my mission. I was tracing the letters of his name carved into the cold stone when a sickeningly familiar, honey-sweet voice cut through the sacred silence. Such a peaceful place. Captain Russell, what a coincidence. I turned, and my blood ran cold. It was Serafina Vance. She was standing there, a few feet away, clad in a charcoal gray designer suit and impossibly expensive shoes, that seemed to profane the very ground they stood on. She was a jarring slash of corporate ambition in a landscape of sacrifice, as out of place as a vulture in a church. "I come here to pay my respects," she lied, a practiced, sympathetic smile playing on her lips. It didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were cold, calculating. "And since fate has brought us together, I thought I might present you with our final offer." She was treating this hallowed ground like a boardroom. $50,000, she said, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "For you personally. A special relocation grant, let's call it. All you have to do is sign the non-disclosure agreement, and this all goes away." She held out a sleek tablet, the screen glowing with a digital contract. She was trying to buy my silence, my honor, right here, among the honored dead. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it took my breath away. My eyes flickered from her face down to the screen. I scanned the dense legal text, and then I saw it. Tucked away in a small clause disguised as a gesture of corporate charity. It stated that upon my signing, Aegis Development Group would generously sponsor a memorial plaque in the name of Colonel Robert Miller to be placed in a VFW hall of their choosing. Colonel Miller, my mentor, my hero. A man whose body lay buried somewhere on these very grounds. They were using his name, his memory, his sacrifice. They were dangling his honor in front of me as a cheap bargaining chip. They had taken the most sacred thing I had and put a price tag on it, turning his legacy into a line item in a dirty transaction. And in that instant, something inside me snapped. The carefully constructed discipline, the years of military training to remain calm under fire, the emotional dam I'd been building for weeks, it all shattered. A rage so pure and white-hot erupted from the core of my being that it felt like a physical force. It wasn't loud. It was silent. It was deadly. It was the heat of a reactor going critical. I lifted my eyes from the tablet and met her gaze. "Get out," I hissed. My voice was barely a whisper, but it was harder than the marble tombstones surrounding us. "Get off this hallowed ground, now, before I forget that I'm in uniform." For the first time, Serafina Vance's composure cracked. She looked genuinely stunned, taking a half step back as if I had physically struck her. Then, recovering, her lips curled into a contemptuous sneer. She turned without another word and walked away, her heels clicking a sharp, angry retreat on the pavement. I stood there, my entire body trembling with the force of my fury. The quiet returned, but it was different now. It was charged. All around me, stretching to the horizon, the silent white stones stood as witnesses, and right there, surrounded by the ghosts of heroes, I made a vow. It wasn't a vow to my superiors, it wasn't a vow to my father, it was a vow to myself, to the memory of Colonel Miller, and to every single soul resting under that perfectly manicured grass. I would not back down, I would not be silenced, I would not be bought. I was going to burn Aegis to the ground, no matter the cost to my career, no matter what it took. The fight was no longer just about justice for my neighbors, it was about honor. I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady and sure. I found Jasper's number and hit dial. He answered on the first ring. "Jasper," I said, my voice cold and clear as a winter morning. "I have a new mission for you. We're done reacting. We're done defending." I took a deep breath, the solemn air of Arlington filling my lungs. It's time to attack. The drive back from Arlington was different. The rage had cooled, solidifying into something hard and clear. Purpose. The despair was gone, burned away by the fire of my vow. I remembered a lecture Colonel Miller had once given on asymmetrical warfare, how a smaller, seemingly weaker force could defeat a larger, better-equipped enemy, not with brute force, but with intelligence, creativity, and by striking at vulnerabilities they never thought to protect. We were a squad of 4 against a corporate Goliath. This was asymmetrical warfare. Our new war room was the back office of Sully's Smokehouse, a cramped space that smelled of stale beer and barbecue rub. Gus, the owner, had cleared it out for us without a second thought. We dragged in a large whiteboard from a nearby office supply store. Sully, Alara, and Jasper gathered around the table, their faces grim but resolute. The atmosphere was no longer that of a support group. It was a pre-mission briefing. I picked up a black dry erase marker, the cap clicking off with a sharp, definitive sound. In the center of the board, I drew the Aegis Development Group logo. "All right," I began, my voice calm and level. "We've been on the defensive for too long. We've been reacting to their moves. That ends now. From this moment on, we hunt them." I drew a series of lines branching out from the central logo. "Our objective is to build a complete target package on Aegis. I want every shell corporation, every backroom deal, every political connection mapped and verified. We're not just looking for a smoking gun. We're building the arsenal. We're going to turn the truth into a weapon." My eyes landed on Jasper. He was watching me intently, his journalist's mind already racing. "Jasper, you're our lead on intelligence gathering," I said. "We're going to use a technique called OSINT, Open Source Intelligence." I saw a flicker of confusion. "Forget hacking, forget breaking and entering," I clarified. "Everything we need is already in the public domain, just buried. Corporate records, SEC filings, the social media accounts of their executives, city planning board minutes, old newspaper archives. I want you to data mine everything. Look for inconsistencies. Look for repeated names on permits and contracts. Aegis is a snake. We need to find its head." Jasper's eyes lit up. He was a reporter with a nose for a story. I was giving him the systematic methodology of an intelligence analyst. I was turning his instincts into a precision instrument. Next, I turned to Sully. "Sully, you're a legend in the vet community. You have a network that money can't buy. Your mission is Operation Fish Barrel." He raised a questioning eyebrow. "It's too easy for them to dismiss us as one isolated group of disgruntled tenants," I explained. "We need to show this is a pattern. I want you hitting every VFW post, every American Legion hall, every local bar where vets hang out, tell our story. Find other victims of Aegis. We need more witnesses, more allies. We're going to build an army, not of soldiers, but of stories. Turn their pain into our voice." Sully gave a slow, firm nod. He understood the mission perfectly. This was his turf, his people. "Ilara," I said, turning to her, "you have the most important job of all. You are our data hub. Every piece of information Jasper finds, every testimony Sully collects, it all comes to you. I need you to build a secure, encrypted database. Organize it, cross-reference it, find the connections we might miss. You're not just storing data. You're the one who will help us see the whole battlefield clearly." Her quiet nod was all the confirmation I needed. Hermetic's precision was now our strategic center. The energy in the room had shifted. The weight of victimhood had been replaced by the focused intensity of a shared mission. We weren't just four displaced people anymore. We were a non-traditional intelligence cell, and we were officially on the offensive. For the next several days, the back room of the smokehouse buzzed with quiet activity. Ilara meticulously built her database, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard. Sully was on the road, his old flip phone working overtime, his conversations a low murmur of shared history and newfound purpose. And Jasper disappeared down a digital rabbit hole, surfacing only for coffee and to mutter about LLCs and holding companies. Then, late one night, my phone buzzed. It was Jasper. His voice was electric with the thrill of the hunt. "Rose, I got something," he said, talking fast. "It's weird, but it's a solid pattern. I've cross-referenced property records for 5 different Aegis projects in 3 states that ended in accidents. Every single one of them, right before the incident, used the same independent contractor for their fire safety and building code inspections." I sat up straighter, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "What's the name of the company?" "Phoenix Safety Solutions," he said. "Catchy, right? Rising from the ashes." The cynicism in his voice was thick. "It gets better." I spent hours digging through business licenses and incorporation papers. Guess who the sole proprietor of Phoenix Safety Solutions is? I waited, holding my breath. He's the brother-in-law of a senior official on the City Planning Commission. I closed my eyes and allowed myself a small, cold smile. There it was, the first concrete link in the chain. The connection between the corporate predator and the government enabler who was supposed to protect us. We were no longer shooting in the dark. We had a name. We had a connection. We had a target. The battle plan was working. Our offensive was working, maybe a little too well. We were drawing blood and the sharks were starting to circle. One evening, I was driving back to my temporary quarters, my mind a numb buzz of exhaustion and caffeine, when my phone screamed with a call from Ilara. Her voice was thin and panicked, stretched taut over the line. "Rose, someone broke into the war room," she gasped. Gus heard a crash from the kitchen, thought it was a stack of trays. He called out, and whoever it was, they bolted out the back. He called the cops, but they were long gone. I slammed on the brakes, pulling a reckless U-turn that squealed tires. I raced back to the smokehouse, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I burst through the back door into a scene of petty, vindictive destruction. Our makeshift command center, our sanctuary of strategy, had been tossed. Chairs were overturned like fallen soldiers. Jasper's research papers were scattered across the floor like dead leaves. And our whiteboard, our beautiful, meticulous map of the enemy's network, had been smashed. A spiderweb of cracks radiating from a single, violent point of impact in its center. The heart of our operation had been shattered. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and fury. A quick survey showed Ilara's encrypted laptop and the backup hard drive were secure. She'd had the foresight to take them with her. They hadn't gotten our intelligence, but they had sent a message, written in the language of violence and intimidation. "We see you, we know what you're doing, and we are not afraid to cross the line." A cold fear, different from any I'd felt in a combat zone, snaked its way up my spine. In Afghanistan, you knew the enemy. There were rules of engagement. This was a street fight with no rules, and I had brought my friends into it. I had put them in the crosshairs. For the first time, a deep, poisonous tremor of doubt seeped into my resolve. Maybe my father was right. Maybe this was a battle I shouldn't have chosen. It was in that precise moment of fear and confusion, as I stood amidst the wreckage of our small rebellion, that the back door swung open again. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim yellow light of the alley, was my father. He was in his full Class A Army service uniform, the dark blue coat pristine, the rows of brightly colored ribbons a testament to a lifetime of service. 4 silver stars gleamed on each shoulder. He was not a man, he was an institution, a monument cast in iron. My heart didn't just sink, it plummeted. This was it, the final lecture. The "I told you so" that I knew was coming, delivered with the full weight of his 4-star authority. I braced myself for the verbal onslaught, for the final crushing wave of his disappointment that would surely sweep away what little was left of my fight. But he didn't speak. He stepped into the room, his polished shoes silent on the messy floor. He surveyed the wreckage with a slow, deliberate gaze, his eyes, the eyes of a master strategist, taking in every detail. He looked at the shattered whiteboard, the broken lines of our investigation, the names and arrows now leading to nowhere. And in his expression, I saw none of the righteous anger or smug vindication I expected. I saw something I had never seen there before, a deep, thoughtful sadness, something that looked almost like pain. His gaze settled on a jagged piece of the whiteboard lying on the floor. He bent down, his movement stiff and measured, and picked it up. Scrawled across the white surface in my own hurried handwriting were the words, "Phoenix Safety Solutions." He held the piece in his hand, staring at it for a long moment before he finally spoke. His voice was low and heavy, thick with a weariness that seemed to age him decades in an instant. After the call from Colonel Bishop, he began, his eyes still fixed on the fragment in his hand. "I didn't believe you. I thought you were being stubborn, reckless." He finally lifted his eyes to meet mine. "But before I was a general, Rose, I was an intelligence officer. It's in my blood." The story didn't sit right. So I made some calls, old contacts, friends at the Pentagon, a few back-channel inquiries at the FBI. He set the broken piece of the board down gently on the table, as if laying a wreath. "Aegis," he said, the name tasting like poison in his mouth. "They're not just a real estate company. They're a front. a criminal enterprise wrapped in a flag of corporate legitimacy. And they're connected to substandard housing construction for military personnel on at least 3 other bases. Fort Hood. Camp Pendleton. They're defrauding the government, Rose. They're stealing from the American taxpayer and endangering the lives of our soldiers and their families. I just stood there, frozen, unable to process what I was hearing. A dam inside me that had been holding for 32 years began to crack, groaning under an impossible pressure. Hot tears welled in my eyes, blurring his decorated uniform into a hazy constellation of color and light. He took a step toward me, not to lecture, not to command, but to stand beside me, shoulder to shoulder, a comrade. And for the first time in my entire adult life, he laid his hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a condescending pat or a controlling grip. It was a firm, steady pressure that communicated more than words ever could. It said, "I am here. I am with you." "You were right, Rose," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "You were fighting a war I was too blind, too proud to see." He took a deep, shuddering breath. I was wrong. Those 3 words, from him. It was the validation I had spent my entire life starving for, and it broke me. The tears spilled over, streaming silently down my cheeks, washing away years of doubt and pain. He looked at me then, and the mask of the general was gone. The disappointed father was gone. In his place was a commanding officer looking at his subordinate not with judgment, but with an absolute, unwavering respect. His posture straightened then, the familiar steel returning to his spine, but this time it was a shield to protect me, not a weapon to be used against me. His voice regained its authoritative timbre, crisp and clear. "All right," he said, his gaze sharp and focused. "Brief me, Captain." He gestured to the wreckage of our war room, a new, formidable light in his eyes. "We have a battle plan to devise." The new war room was my father's home study. It was a world away from the cramped back room of the smokehouse, lined with mahogany bookshelves filled with military history and strategy, a large American flag standing proudly in the corner. The room radiated quiet, established power. My father stood before his desk like a commander addressing his staff. "We have the intelligence," he said, his voice a low, commanding rumble. "Now we execute a coordinated attack. We need shock and awe." He turned to Jasper, who was sitting at the conference table, surrounded by stacks of files that now stood several feet high. "Jasper, your report. Is it ready to deploy?" Jasper pushed his glasses up his nose, a confident gleam in his eyes. "General, I have enough evidence for a multi-part series. It's ironclad." A rare, thin smile touched my father's lips. "Even better," he said. He picked up his phone. "I'm calling an old friend. Jasper, have you ever heard of a program called 60 Minutes? A week later, Jasper Thorne was no longer a freelance blogger hunting for a scoop. He was sitting in a television studio in New York City, across from one of the most respected and feared investigative journalists in the country. He methodically laid out the entire sordid story of Aegis Development Group, from the suspicious fires to the political connections, backing up every claim with the mountain of irrefutable evidence we had compiled. The first wave of our assault, the media blitz, had been launched. Simultaneously, Sully's Operation Fish Barrel was creating a powerful undertow. His calls had stirred up a quiet storm of anger within the veteran community. One evening, an encrypted email landed in my inbox. The sender was anonymous. The message was short and to the point. "I am the chief accountant at Aegis," it read. "I know where the second set of books is kept, the real ones. I can't live with this anymore. I will testify." Her name was Tanya, a woman who had watched corporate greed curdle into criminal negligence and had finally reached her breaking point. She was our inside source, the human intelligence we desperately needed to crack them open from within. My father immediately made a call to a specialized white-collar crime task force at the FBI. Within hours, they had arranged a secure line of contact, ensuring Tanya's safety and the legal integrity of her testimony. The enemy's walls were beginning to crumble from the inside out. But my father wasn't done. The third front of our attack was one only he could open. He used the full weight of his 4 stars to demand a formal investigation from the Army's Criminal Investigation Division, the CID, into the quality of Aegis-built housing on military bases. "This is no longer a civilian matter, Rose," he explained to me, his face grim. "When a defense contractor's fraudulent practices endanger the safety and readiness of our troops and their families, it becomes a matter of national security." The effect was immediate and decisive. Teams of stone-faced CID investigators in their civilian suits descended upon Aegis offices and construction sites across the country. Armed with federal warrants, they seized documents, computers, and building material samples. The legal vice was tightening. Aegis could no longer hide behind high-priced lawyers and backroom deals. They were now fighting the full investigative might of the U.S. military. Feeling the walls closing in, backed into a corner, Serafina Vance made one last, desperate move. She ambushed me, not in public, but in the near-empty parking lot of the Post Exchange here at Fort Bragg as I was leaving for the day. She stepped out from between 2 cars, her power suit looking rumpled, her mask of cool confidence finally gone, replaced by a raw, unconcealed desperation. "Rose, you've won," she said, her voice strained. There was no honey in it now, only acid. "Name your price, a number, any number. Enough for you and your whole family to live on for the rest of your lives. Just call it off. Stop the 60-minute story from airing." My father, ever the strategist, had anticipated this. He was sitting in my car a few rows over, silently observing, a silent partner in this final confrontation. I looked straight into Serafina Vance's eyes, the eyes of a cornered predator making one last lunge. I thought of the families who had lost everything. I thought of Sully and Alara. I thought of Colonel Miller's name on that bribe sheet. And I thought of my father, the man who had taught me what honor meant, even if we'd both forgotten it for a while. "My honor isn't for sale, Ms. Vance," I said. My voice as calm and steady as a rifle sight. "And neither is my father's." I left her standing there in the parking lot, her last-ditch effort dissolving into the humid North Carolina air. I got in my car, and as I turned the key, I looked over at my father. He simply nodded, a look of profound, unqualified pride on his face. I put the car in drive, my last words to her hanging in the space between us. "I'll see you in court." After the 60-minute segment aired, the Aegis empire didn't just crumble, it imploded. The story created a firestorm of public outrage. Investors fled, stock prices plummeted, and government contracts were frozen overnight. Armed with Tanya's testimony and the mountain of evidence from the CID, the Department of Justice moved in. Serafina Vance and the rest of the Aegis executive team were arrested, their perp walks broadcast on the evening news. They faced a litany of federal charges, from wire fraud and bribery to reckless endangerment. The courts forced the company into a massive settlement, a fund designed to compensate not just our small group, but all the victims they had left in their wake in cities across the country. Justice, it turned out, was not for sale. It had been slow, and it had been costly, but it had arrived with the force of a thunderclap. We could have taken our share of the settlement and walked away. We could have taken the money and tried to piece our individual lives back together. But that's not what we did. It was Alara's idea. During one of our last meetings in the back of the smokehouse, she suggested we pool our resources. We didn't just want compensation, we wanted to build something. So we established a nonprofit organization, the Shield Foundation. Its mission is simple: to provide legal aid and advocate for safe, affordable housing for veterans and military families who find themselves targeted by predatory companies like Aegis. We turned our battle into a permanent watchtower. And on the scarred patch of land where our old lives had burned down, a new building began to rise. It wasn't just a block of apartments, it was a symbol. Built with the best materials, exceeding every safety code, designed to be a sanctuary. It was a testament to resilience, a fortress of community. Sully has a corner apartment on the second floor with a balcony. Alara's place is filled with sunlight and plants. The Aljamils have a 3-bedroom unit where their children's laughter now echoes in safe hallways. They, along with several other young military families, are the beating heart of a community that was forged in fire, stronger and more connected than before. On the day of the dedication ceremony, my father and I stood together on the rooftop, both of us in our dress uniforms. A gentle breeze snapped at the enormous American flag being raised on the new flagpole, its bright colors brilliant against the clear blue sky. We watched in comfortable silence as it reached the top, a proud banner flying over the home we had all fought for. "I understand now," my father said softly, his eyes fixed on the flag. "Your laugh, that night. I finally understand it." He turned to me, his gaze clear and direct. "You weren't laughing because you'd saved a few possessions from the fire. You were laughing at the absurdity of it all. At me. Because you knew, didn't you? You knew that as long as we protect the honor of those who came before us, as long as we fight for the values they stood for, we can never truly lose." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw nothing but pure, undiluted pride in his eyes. There were no hidden clauses, no comparisons, no reservations. "You taught an old general a lesson about real honor, Rose," he said, his voice quiet. "That it isn't about maintaining an image or collecting awards. It's about doing the right thing, especially when it's hard. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought on any battlefield on a map." He put his hand on my shoulder, just as he had in the ruined war room. But this time, it was different. It wasn't the firm, steady grip of a commander. It was softer. He pulled me closer, and for the first time since I was a little girl, my father hugged me. A real, heartfelt embrace that spoke of years of unspoken words and misunderstood intentions. "The legacy of Iron Russell," he said, his voice thick with emotion, his words a near whisper against my hair. "It isn't my campaigns. It isn't the medals or the stars." He pulled back just enough to look me in the eye. "It's you." Hearing those words, feeling the genuine warmth of his embrace was like the final, perfect setting of a bone that had been broken for decades. The map of scars inside me didn't vanish, but in that moment, they were finally, completely healed. The fire took a building, but it gave back so much more. It forged a justice warrior, it reforged a family, and it built a new, lasting legacy, not of iron and steel, but of the unbreakable bonds of community and the enduring power of honor. Our war may be over, but for the Shield Foundation, our mission has just begun. And so, my part in this fight came to a close. But the work of the Shield Foundation, our real legacy, has just begun. I wanted to share this story with you, to reach through the speakers and let you know that if you've ever felt unseen or undervalued, you are not alone. Our true legacy isn't defined by the family we're born into, but by the one we build and the good we leave behind. If this story resonated with you, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing. It helps our community grow and ensures these stories reach those who need to hear them most. And before you go, I have one last question for you. In the comments below, please tell me in one word, what does the word legacy mean to you? Thank you for listening.